Thank you all for coming, everybody. Very pleased this week to have Erin Letovsky. Is that, by the way, is that still your name? Or
It is.
Okay. Because on Facebook you're Erin L, so I wasn't sure whether.
Oh yeah, same name, same
Okay.
person.
And Erin graduated in 2007 with a environmental studies major in biology and fine arts minors. She got a master's degree at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and is now working in Australia as coordinator of fire recovery for the Department of Environment there in Australia. And she got up at 3 in the morning to give us this talk. So we're very pleased to have her here with us today. So at the end, we don't have anybody in the lecture hall today, but at the end, so then we will, if people have a question, just let me know in the chat that you have a question, or, unmute yourself and ask your question, whatever. So I'll turn it over to Erin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for asking me to present today. I'll be talking about bushfire recovery in Victoria, Australia after the 2019-20 fires. And I'm presenting to you from Melbourne, Australia. But before I begin, I'd like to recognize that I'm presenting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. So I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be watching or listening here today. So I currently work for the Victorian State Government here in Australia for the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and we call ourselves DELP. W is silent. I'm not sure why, but that's how it is. And I work in emergency recovery. This is my 10th year working for the state government's environment department, and it's had a few names over this time, but during all this time I've been involved in recovery during and after a number of emergencies. Given the sheer scale of the fires that happened here in Australia, I've been really immersed in recovery since the start of January this year while the fires were still burning. So today I'll talk to you about what I do now, the fires this past year, what happened in the state of Victoria, and what we've been doing to recover from these fires. Thankfully, a lot of the bushfire impact assessment and recovery work has been documented, so I'll be able to show you some of the videos that have been made of the projects in the recovery program. So for my emergency role, which is different but related to my day job, I'm part of the state's bushfire rapid risk assessment teams, and we call ourselves the RATS. It operates as part of Forest Fire Management Victoria, which is attached to my department. And I'm deployed with a small team to natural disasters, usually forest fires, and we assess impacts and risks and help plan the next steps for recovery. So these teams are similar to the US Forest Service's BEAR teams, the Burnt Area Emergency Response Teams, that get deployed to forest fires. But I'm not just there for the initial impact assessments. I work in recovery for the long haul. And this year I've been involved in planning and coordinated the significant recovery program for the Environment Department. So both my day job and my emergency role are in recovery. And it's been quite intense since January. So as part of my involvement coordinating this recovery program, I also look for ways to do things better so that we learn from our experiences and build on them. And also become better prepared and more resilient to the disasters that we expect to see as a result of the predicted impacts of climate change on our environment. So these photos were taken before the current coronavirus restrictions came into effect. In Victoria, we have quite strict restrictions. And right now I'm working remotely and will be training staff remotely for the upcoming summer season, which for us in Victoria starts next month. So we will see what happens. So we'll just go back to the start of the 2019 and 2020 Australian bushfires, which captured international attention for a range of reasons before the coronavirus became a global focus. And in this fire season, the state of Victoria, which is in Southeast Australia, endured extreme fire conditions, and fires started in late 2019 and spread very quickly. So this video captures some of the destruction around towns in the eastern part of the state, in early January 2020. And for context, these towns are about 3 hours east of Melbourne. So just to locate you on the map, here's a map of Southeast Australia with the fire affected areas covering the states of New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia. Right now I'm located in Melbourne, which is in the bottom center of the map. And the towns of Bairnsdale and Malakuta, which kind of border the main fire affected areas in Victoria, are about 3 and 5 hours east of Melbourne, respectively. So for scale, the fire affected areas are shown over a map of New York to provide some context. The Victoria is about 1.7 times the size of New York State in area. So just to give you a sense of the impact that these fires had, over 3.7 million acres were impacted, with 3.3 million of those being public lands. 15 national and state parks were burnt, and 92 significant conservation reserves had more than half their area burned. More than 120 communities were directly impacted. We had 5 fatalities in Victoria, including community members and our own forest firefighters. Some communities in the eastern and northeastern parts of the state were isolated for weeks as thousands of miles of roads and critical infrastructure were rendered unserviceable. Over 450 houses were damaged or destroyed, and millions of dollars of other public infrastructure was lost that supported these communities and their economies, particularly tourism. One of the things that captured international attention was the significant impact on wildlife and biodiversity that these fires had. There were immeasurable impacts on the really unique environments that we have here. An estimated billions of animals were lost. Over 240 plant and animal species had more than 50% of their habitat impacted. 42 rare or threatened plant and animal species had more than 50% of their habitat impacted by high severity fire. And I should also add that impacts to communities and their economies have really been exacerbated by the overlay of coronavirus restrictions, which stopped tourism in the area after the fires and have really prevented economies from recovering quickly. So these areas are still in many ways doing it tough. So I will also go through what my involvement in the fires has been and what happens during the early stages of relief and recovery to help set this up. So as I mentioned, I'm a member of the Bushfire Rapid Risk Assessment teams. So in January, we deployed a team to our state control center to do a rapid appraisal of the likely impacts of the fires and help prioritize our efforts, mainly focused on environmental recovery, to identify where the most significant threats might be and develop a plan of attack to deploy teams to undertake more detailed assessments across the state. So the initial impact assessment also informed our first funding proposals for critical assets and habitats, and led to the development of a program of deployment to cover the different shaded areas in the eastern part of the state, which is in the map on the slide there. So we then deployed 7 teams over the course of about 6 weeks as soon as fire grounds became safe to start assessing these. And we looked at the impacts of the fire complexes on the environment, including species and ecosystems and habitat, waterways and catchments, public infrastructure and assets, cultural heritage values and assets, forestry, and visitation and tourism. So I led one of these deployments where we had 2 teams assessing 2 different fire complexes. And what we do is we're a small multidisciplinary team of about 6 to 10 people or more for double deployments. And we contain 1 or 2 discipline experts representing their field of expertise. And most of us come from the Department and Forest Fire Management Victoria, but we have team members that really represent many organizations from across government in their day jobs. So we're sent out to incident control centers near the emergency or the fire for a rapid 7-day deployment, and we work together to quickly identify these impacts and the significant risks to those values. And we rank them collectively and make recommendations on the actions that need to be done in priority order. And we think about this in a really holistic way. We then develop a report that has costed prioritized recommendations for a range of people, and it's used in several ways. So one way is that these reports and our presentation goes to public land managers and the emergency managers as recommendations for what they really need to start doing now during the emergency to be addressing some of these risks. So significant habitat or species that need to be considered during the emergency response, whether efforts need to be changed, whether crews can be repurposed to undertake or diverted to undertake assessments or protection and mitigation actions. And then it also informs what they'll do immediately after as well, and informs their recovery plan. And then these reports also go to recovery planners at a regional and state level to inform the initial recovery planning and our significant funding proposals. So they're used as evidence to support significant funding bids and to help target more detailed assessments. So during our deployment, we do on-ground and aerial surveys on a helicopter, and we engage with those on the ground. And we use a number of data sources and methods to identify and assess risks, a range of types of information, local knowledge, satellite imagery, et cetera. And we do this really quickly. So we have to be quite good at gathering information fast, working well as a team, and thinking about the big picture and really bouncing off each other and thinking about all the other disciplines that may be affected. So this year, our reports went to experts and policy or program areas in a range of areas and helped to inform the funding bids that we then developed and coordinated, which I did in my day job. During the fires, I know that there were many photos internationally of people giving water to koalas, for example. But that, we really had a massive effort to look at relief for people and wildlife during the fires. That really started while the fires were still burning. And I was involved in coordinating the department's efforts to ensure that this fed into that the recovery started early and that we were picking up from the relief to ensure it was a really smooth process. Some of the things that we do as part of our relief efforts, we work to help restore essential power infrastructure and services, clear roads and tracks, provide safe drinking water to communities, and refill water tanks. We deploy mobile wildlife triage units to assist injured wildlife, and this year deployed a number of vets and specialists from our zoos all around the state and sent them into these areas to help injured wildlife. And we also deployed wildlife assessment teams to go into fire affected areas and treat animals on site. We undertook emergency extractions of threatened species, and we relocated some wildlife out of fire impacted areas. We also delivered aerial food drops. We provided grants for wildlife carers who had to take in a number of these a number of injured wildlife. And we also did reconnaissance flights to better understand the impacts and the status of remaining habitat and support planning of emergency actions. I'll just show you a video of some of the aerial assessments that were done and how they informed recovery as well.
In the last week or so, we've started being able to get access to the fire impacted areas. We're seeing what's happening on the ground, and there is large scale impact. The fire has been very severe in lots of areas, but there are areas where nature has survived, and that's where our focus is really turning. Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Norman. I'm the Chief Conservation Scientist at Parks Victoria, and I'm one of a large group of people that are looking at the impacts of nature and fire across Victoria. So it's only in the last week or so that we've been able to get into some of these fire affected areas, and recently we did a reconnaissance flight across all of eastern Victoria, and we chose 18 sites of really key importance for wildlife, for threatened species, for threatened habitats, and we flew over and took footage and information on how those areas are faring. From the flights we've recently done, we're finding there's really sobering impacts, really high intensity fires in some areas. In other areas, there are large patches of green on the landscape, and we're really pleased that some areas have remained unscathed at this stage, and they're becoming the real focus of our attention.
My name's James Todd. I'm the Executive Director of Biodiversity in the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. We've been working with project partners and portfolio agencies like Parks Victoria, as well as subject matter experts and independent scientists. We've come up with a plan which is about identifying the shorter term actions and the longer term actions that we need to recover biodiversity in Victoria. On the back of that, the Victorian Government has allocated $17.5 million for emergency actions over the next 6 months to support that recovery. The scale of this and the impacts on our forested areas of eastern Victoria is really unprecedented. We're moving into new times and new circumstances because of climate change and its impacts. So this is not a normal bushfire, it's beyond that. Probably the most sobering was the intensity of the fire around areas like Goongerah and Martins Creek. So in these areas the fire was so intense that you could see the streaking up the hills from the fire tornadoes sucking the ash up. So these are very high intensity fires, and these will have long-term impacts. In many ways we weren't expecting the worst. The footprint is so large it looked like everything had been wiped out, and that's not the case. We came across lots of green forest intact within waterways on burnt landscapes. So the moisture areas, those temperate rainforests where trees like lily pillies remained and were moist enough not to burn, there's these green corridors along the waterways that have survived. And in some places they were really quite large areas. So approaching Mount Ellery in Erin Letovsky National Park, we went over lots of burnt areas, but then we came across an entire area of tree ferns and ancient Gondwanan tree sassafras, they're cone-shaped trees in amongst these landscapes. And there was a really large area there of intact, healthy rainforest. We went looking for and hoping for the survival of the brush-tailed rock wallaby population in Little River Gorge, which is in the Snowy River National Park. And we were absolutely delighted to come over a burnt ridge and find the entire gorge is still fully green, full of vegetation, full of water, clean water running down the middle, waterfalls running out of the rock faces. And we were so relieved to know that the stronghold for brush-tailed rock wallabies in Victoria is still intact. We know that fires burn patchily. In some parts of the landscape they burn very hot, in other cases they may not burn at all. The sort of information that we're getting through the aerial surveys will help us, one, understand the relative impacts, and two, help us target the actions to the things that are going to have the best outcomes. Fair to say that recovery may take a long time, and for some of these landscapes they may change forever.
So, given that video showing really the extent of the fires and the varied impacts, when so much is impacted, how do you prioritize what you do? And that was the challenge that we faced across all of the responsibilities that the department has, not just wildlife and biodiversity, but the range of other things that it's responsible for: waterways, public roads, catchments, etc. So we look at our bushfire RATS reports We look at other expert assessments, we identify risks, and we agree on the actions to address them. And then we plan it out, what you need to do by when, and get the resources to do it. So a more detailed report was developed during the initial phases of the recovery, called Victoria's Bushfire Emergency Biodiversity Response and Recovery. And that's a publicly available report on our departmental website. One of the really great things about the report is its visuals, and I've stolen one of them here. And that's a great visual representation of how our recovery really has been planned in a systematic way, not just across biodiversity and wildlife matters, but across all of our responsibilities. So we use this approach really to look at planning and prioritizing all of our actions, and making the case for the resources needed and providing the advice to those who can make those decisions. So this involved developing and coordinating and advising on funding bids for government's consideration, and using those assessments and reports, including the RATS reports and the early recon flights and some of the initial modeling work, to really inform those proposals. Then involves securing the resources, the people, and the funding to do it, and bringing many, many stakeholders together to really deliver on government priorities and use our resources efficiently to empower communities, including traditional owners and other stakeholders, to lead in recovery. We developed a number of recovery plans in our own department and with other agencies, and we're now leading a comprehensive program that we're delivering on the ground. And of course, this has all been done with the overlay of coronavirus. We had to dramatically change how we work on the ground, how we work with communities, and how we travel, or in some cases, how we don't. So immediately after the fires, our department also started to work with a new coordination entity that was set up to help develop a massive state recovery plan, which sets out the state's priorities for the next 12 to 18 months. The plan doesn't just cover environmental recovery, it covers some psychosocial recovery, health and well-being, economic recovery, infrastructure recovery, and Aboriginal culture and healing, given the significant impact that the fires had on country and on Aboriginal Victorians and traditional owners. So noting that this recovery will continue long after this, so this is just a point in time plan, and we will continue to refine it so that it really takes us through the longer recovery journey. DELP's the lead responsible for environment and biodiversity recovery, but we also have a main role in the infrastructure recovery and support Aboriginal culture and healing lines of recovery. So many of the funding proposals that were put forward based on the reports and assessments that were done have since become funded projects, which is great. And the state government has invested a significant amount in recovery, as well as the Australian government, with a lot of investment being made in this department's recovery program. And the one that we're coordinating has received over 110 million Australian dollars to date in state and federal government support, which is really substantial and really great news. As I said, this recovery program is broad, and it covers so many projects, from rebuilding supports for residents who need to rebuild their home, to biodiversity actions, road repair, rebuilding visitor sites in public lands, protecting catchments, and helping forests to recover. But even though we've had to really change how we work really quickly, COVID-19 isn't slowing down our work on recovery. It was really important that we maintain the momentum that was there during the fires to be able to build on the work started, so that we could see the benefits as quickly as possible, and so that the community and the environment could as well. And we've employed many new people to support bushfire recovery as part of the state's new Working for Victoria program. That's a program that helps people who have become unemployed as a result of COVID to sign up for jobs to deliver public works like bushfire recovery. So it's really allowed us to press on with the delivery of recovery and other land management initiatives right across the state, and also while providing some much needed employment for people who are out of work right now. So some of our big achievements to date in this recovery program has been reseeding over 28,000 acres of alpine and mountain ash forests, which I'll show in a bit. We've undertaken weed and pest control programs to protect at-risk native plant and animal species. We've completed heritage infrastructure assessments. We've repaired and replaced bridges, reopened over 3,600 miles of roads. We've replaced hundreds and hundreds of miles of public land fence lines. We've restored campgrounds, trails, and visitor sites. And we've set up grants and rebates to help people to build back better in a more resilient way. We've streamlined rebuilding regulations to help them do this in a faster way as well. And we've supported local governments in the rebuilding process by providing them with resources and the assistance they need to communicate and work better with their communities. But it's just one thing for me to rattle off a list of all the things that the department has been able to do thus far with its portfolio partners to help those in need and to help the environment. But so to give you a better feel for this great work, as part of this recovery program, I'd like to show you some videos of my colleagues in DELP and Parks Victoria that document some of these projects. So this video features some of my colleagues who are managing a piece of work within the broader recovery program, which aims to address the impacts now and supports resilience for the future. And it reseeds vast areas of forest impacted by the fire, and also involves collecting seed to build up a seed bank so that we have seed when it's needed again after future events.
One of the main things I love about the ash forest is actually the smell. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to come into these forests and stand under these enormous trees and just close your eyes and smell and listen to the bush. Because of the extensive fires over recent years, there's actually a substantial area of forest that's at risk.
There's about 22,000 hectares of immature ash affected by the 2020 Victorian fires. This project aims to treat between 8,000 and 10,000 hectares of immature fire-affected ash in Victoria. We're aiming to ensure that we don't convert ash forest type to non-forest type. The project is funded by the Native Vegetation Improvement Stream as part of the Reducing Bushfire Risk program. With the help of Melbourne University, Parks Victoria and Greening Australia, we devised a process of prioritising which areas we're going to target for fire recovery.
The Alpine Ash Fire Risk Mitigation Project was a project designed to explore the potential risks of losing alpine ash forest in the future, in particular to changing fire regimes and changing climate. We run simulations and explore the potential for alpine ash to persist or not persist.
The initial project, which was funded by Safer Together, was set up a couple of years ago. My role in this project was understanding how we can utilise the information from that mitigating fire risk project and use it in a way to help prioritise where we need to reseed alpine ash forests after the 2019-20 bushfires.
We intend to sow around 4,000 kilograms of seed in this fire recovery effort for alpine ash and up to about 2,000 kilograms of seed for mountain ash.
If you think of the Great Dividing Range in Victoria, it's huge. My role is to provide a scientific and technical recommendation on where to sow, how much to sow, and how to achieve a regrowth forest. We can forecast where in that massive landscape it's going to flower, and of course flowering leads to seed. Once we locate a site, we call the climbers in, and the climber will climb the tree. He will delimb to a prescription. About 50% of the crown is taken, individual branches. The nice thing about that is we can keep the tree alive. We're looking for large, well-formed capsules. And then we have a team of ground collectors that come along and collect all that capsule material into a bale for later processing.
Behind us is a seed extraction facility which we use to get the seed out of the capsules. We mimic the natural process of a fire under the canopy, heat up those capsules, the seed falls out. We grab that seed, clean the seed, and we store it in a refrigerated container for future use in fire recovery. So we're working in partnership with Vic Forest to provide seed collection and management services, as well as aerial sowing using helicopters.
Local knowledge and knowing how good the seed bed is really critical for the seed to be sown and germinate on. We've got to match hours in the air to the shapes on the ground that we want to sow. We know where the seed was collected from, so geographically where it sits in the landscape. And so we try and get the seed that's closest to that site that's been burnt. The helicopter has a seeder. There's a hopper inside the helicopter where the seed can be loaded into. So the helicopter pilot flies the seed over the shapes that we've nominated.
This program this year is, I would say, the largest program of its type ever implemented in Victoria. Certainly single event in Victoria and most probably Australia as well. So we went into this fire season with a lot of forest at an age where it was, I guess, reproductively immature and quite vulnerable to this event. And it's a really vast area, so we had about 70,000 hectares of ash forest impacted. But we're not just talking about this value or that value, we're talking about what that forest provides as a whole in terms of, all sorts of values, including biodiversity and catchment values, even cultural and economic values as well. Most people would agree that ash forests are some of the most beautiful on Earth. It's really important we try and, restore these forests as best we can.
So that's one of the really great projects that is a big part of our bushfire recovery program in the department, and also one of the really important ways that we're using recovery to be more resilient for future events. So we're collecting seeds and ensuring that we have that insurance for future fires. We've also done a lot of work on protecting and managing risks to species and communities that rely on waterways and aquatic habitats. So it's not just the immediate effects of the fire that threaten them, it's also the aftermath. Post-fire debris flow is a really significant concern, where ash and sediment flow into waterways, clogging up streams and suffocating aquatic life. That's really not just environmental values, biodiversity values, that really affects water quality as well. It affects the whole community. So we do dedicate a lot of attention and resourcing to addressing these issues. And this next video shows some of the work being done as part of our Bushfire Biodiversity Response and Recovery Program to protect the spotted tree frog, which is a critically endangered species, and which was also under threat as a result of the bushfires, which impacted its habitat.
We know that the spotted tree frog is critically endangered across its Victorian and New South Wales range. It's really restricted in its distribution, it's critically endangered and it's actively declining. So we're looking at the fire impacts on the spotted tree frog, and as with a number of terrestrial and aquatic species, it's not so much the fire but the post-fire impacts that can have a really significant impact on this species. We've got a specialist team from Melbourne University and Zoos Victoria involved who are experienced in frog surveys. They're undertaking both day and night surveys. So this is a basking species which likes the rocky environment during the day, and it actually calls from in the breeding period and uses the same bouldery habitat at night. So with rocks warmed up during the day, the species will still be present. So we're out at night under headlamp into the early hours of the evening to be able to monitor particularly the adults, which will come out at that stage. This area is subject to multiple fires, multiple sediment events, and potentially we're looking at the other effects such as disease and particularly the chytrid impact on this stream.
There are two main threats to the spotted tree frog. Firstly, non-native fish species being trout, carp and redfin, but also a disease known as chytridiomycosis caused by a pathogen known as chytrid fungus. So there are a number of steps we can potentially take to protect the spotted tree frog, and one of those things is to capture animals from important populations like this and take them into captivity and create insurance populations and potentially breed frogs and re-release them to sites where we're able to manage the threats.
So this is just the start of our recovery work across all our different areas, but it is the end of my presentation. So thanks so much for your time and also for inviting me to share this really great work with you, which I'm really proud of.
Thank you very much, Erin. We've got time for questions. So who would like to start? Okay, Jacob, you want to unmute yourself? If you have a question, just let me know in the chat and then I'll call on you. So Jacob, you're up.
All right, so I guess mine is really just about like the progress on how this is going, because just recently, you know, just online, there have been pictures that have come out from areas that have shown regrowth, but like, is there actual progress you're seeing in the areas that the fire tore through, like good progress going in the way that you would hope?
Yes, there is. So regrowth comes in really quickly after the fires. So I was deployed to some of the areas in early March, and we saw regrowth, you know, there was regrowth within a matter of weeks. That's the growth that you see along tree trunks is called epicormic growth. And that's a really important part of the recovery process here. And so regrowth is I suppose really in general is easy to see and easy to be encouraged by. The really important bit that we need to get right is making sure it's the right regrowth. So to make sure that native species are able to come back and aren't outcompeted by invasives and weeds and pests. So that's why there was a lot of money put into, a lot of on the ground work put into pest, animal, and plant control. So aerial shooting operations to target feral deer, feral goat, feral pigs, other browsers, to make sure that you know, the regeneration of the native species wasn't hampered.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Bill, you're next.
So to bounce right off of Jake's question, have you guys been using GIS to track all of this data that you're collecting, or have you been using a different program?
Yes, so we do collect data spatially, and you can look at online. We use Esri story maps to talk about what's happened and where our actions are, and then we're also collecting information, spatial data on what's been done. So because of the sheer kind of breadth and scale of the recovery program, when we're putting a lot of effort into making sure that we can communicate all the progress for all of our activities really seamlessly and using spatial data.
Genevieve has a question.
I have a question, a little bit different topic. How was your path to this job, going from Alfred to Scotland to Australia? Did you know you always wanted to work in a different country?
No, I didn't actually. I didn't know where I wanted to work. I guess I followed interests. So what led me to Scotland was that they had a great program, a great research program looking at the effects of mine drainage on aquatic communities and aquatic ecosystems. So that's where I went to do research. And when I went to Australia, I thought that because of the mining industry here, I would be able to pick that up easily. But I found myself working in waterway management, which led me to a job with the Environment Department. And really what got me into emergency management and the complexity there was the requirement of the department for its employees to have an emergency role. And it's like being offered for me, it was like being offered a free extracurricular activity. It was really exciting. And I knew I wanted to choose something where I could use my environmental science background to be able to understand emergencies and help with recovery. So I put my hand up to be involved in the Bushfire RATS program. And so through that program, I've been able to learn so much from other experts who have really specialists in their field, and in ecologists and forest scientists, soil scientists, geologists, hydrogeologists. It's really quite incredible, as well as archaeologists. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Derek, you're next.
Okay, so my question, I was gonna ask kind of the same question as Billy. What kind of technological software were you guys using to collect data and use to try to compare relationships and stuff like that? But you answered it with GIS. So I have another question too. I recently seen something that the koala population is now, are they actually extinct in Australia or are they not?
No, they're not. In some places in Australia, they're more rare than others. Other places have a lot of koalas. But it really, it's all about balance.
Okay, all right. I was just making, I just wanted to be sure because, that was really, heartbreaking to see that when I saw that. But I'm glad that, confirmed it and that there's actually, still some out there in the wild.
Oh, for sure. And there were a lot of efforts to actually pick up and move koalas out of the fire area because they're so slow.
Yeah,
So,
I saw
yeah.
I saw a lot of videos, social media videos of you guys doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, Victor Ostrauer has a question.
Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Can you unmute yourself?
I came in a bit late and perhaps you covered this, but it seems as though you have a very complex and well-developed program. How much of this was set up previously, perhaps on the basis of previous experience?
Well, a not so technical answer is a good part of it. So I've been involved in recovery for a few events, floods and fires. And every time I learn a bit more. And every time we go through this, the my colleagues learn a bit more. So we have a lot of information about where our biodiversity assets are and where those populations and communities are that we want to protect. We have a lot of information about what worked well to help residents rebuild in previous fires. And so some of it was, you'd like to think was rinse and repeat, but a lot of it was actually figuring out how to really rapidly scale up to address the sheer scale of this. So some of it was trial and error, but we did put a lot of effort into making sure we had things mostly right before they were deployed.
Impressive. Thank you.
Thanks.
Andy, you have a problem?
Yeah. Quick question, Erin. How much does the state and federal funding for conservation fluctuate depending on, whether the government leans to the left or leans to the right or so on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there's obviously a fluctuation. Some governments have different priorities. The current government has a really strong focus on environment and biodiversity values. And that's the environment minister is very passionate about environment and biodiversity and the significant contribution that it has to the economy and to people, as well as it just being important as a value that we protect. So that, I think has played a really big part in that priority has really come through in the investment that we've seen in the environmental recovery.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I'm not sure if it's Sheila or Robert has a question, but one of you unmute yourself and ask your question.
Just wanted to know, as we see wildfires in California and Colorado, they're very severe. Any key either do's or don'ts in terms of forest fire recovery management lessons that the United States should be doing or not doing?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Should we be raking our forests?
I'm talking in terms of recovery post fire, based on your experience. Any key do nots or do's?
Yeah, I think that anything in the do category really relates to things that have been shown to work, not just in Australia, but in other countries as well. Supporting environmental recovery is really important, not just for environmental recovery's sake, but it really has been shown to help with psychosocial recovery, communities recovery. And also it's about not having an entirely top-down recovery program. So when you invest in recovery as a government, it's also about making sure you're empowering communities to find, to be able to drive their own recovery. I think that one resident had made a comment that they wanted a hand up, not a handout. And I think that's pretty consistent with what a lot of communities have expressed after fires in Australia. And those are the recovery programs that have tended to work in terms of people have reported better outcomes. Rebuilding has occurred quicker in those where people really own their recovery and they don't feel like it's a program that's being done to them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think we have time for one more question, and I think Bill has a second question.
So I know I saw a lot of people going to Australia to assist while the fires were still going on. Have you seen a large drop-off in the time since then of worldwide help? Has it been mostly other Australian organizations and members, or has it been still that consistent worldwide not organization, but outreach? Like I saw firefighters from America getting on planes to go to Australia. Is there still people that dedicated?
Yeah, so that did happen in this event. So when I was deployed, I worked alongside a group of Americans who had been sent to Australia as well. They're working in the same incident control center. Obviously so we send forest firefighters and emergency management specialists over to the States and Canada, and we receive help in kind. There's always been that spirit of cooperation between North America and Australia for emergency management. With coronavirus, things are obviously a bit different. And so I think, they're looking at making sure that risks are absolutely minimized and being able to, see how we can address preparedness here and keep firefighters safe before making commitments about sending people where they may be at risk.
Okay, so let's thank our speaker, but I'll leave the Zoom open so that if anybody wants to talk to Erin informally, although she probably wants to go back to bed. But if there's any other, I know there's some people here who know her from back when, if they want to express their greetings. But thank you very much, Erin. That was a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it. And I love seeing those videos. And I actually also appreciate that you didn't show videos just of what do biologists call them, charismatic megafauna, that you chose the frogs in the trees to show us the videos about. So thank you very much. And again, next week we have Todd Tejan, who graduated in 1990, who's going to talk about 20 years of drought in the Colorado River Basin. He is the regional water quality manager for Lake Mead. So please feel free to join us next week. But again, thank you so much, Erin. I've got to bomb out to another class, but as I said, I won't close the meeting. So if people want to talk at all, that be my guest.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. Great to see you.
Good to see you too.
Erin, I have a question. This is Sally Hopkins. I don't know how to do the chat thing.
Okay.
Did you state in the beginning how these fires started? Were they man started or were they
lightning?
It was lightning.
Yeah.
Everything was lightning. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's how that's how it's different to the States. The States
right
has a lot of fires that start from humans, various human causes, intentional or not. Most of our fires are started by lightning. Yeah.
By lightning. Okay, thank you. I didn't know whether you stated that or not, so.
No, I didn't,
Good.
but yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very